welcome back to another episode of the ADH Dads. I'm your host, CJ.
And I'm JJ.
And it's been a minute, man. We've had some time. Look at my hair; it's grown out. Look at my face; it's gotten fat.
Yeah, that's funny, man. Yeah, we have had a little bit of a lapse, but we've had quite a bit going on in our lives, though. So I know it's
sure have.
The way of the world, I guess.
Listen, screen-free summers take a lot of work, bud. I'll tell you.
Yes, they do.
Keeping me busy, running me around. I'll tell you.
I believe on our last one that we recorded, I had mentioned that I'd be going into a period of taking some medication that might have a strong effect on me, and if in fact did have a very strong effect on me. Listeners, I am currently sitting down because I am incapable of standing for very long, which that's what I usually was doing when we were recording. And basically, this antibiotic that I took, it started to wear away at my tendons, and there's a particularly increased risk of rupturing the Achilles tendon. But in addition to that, with all the other black box warnings, it said that you could have anxiety and you could have peripheral neuropathy. Well, I got all of those side effects, so now I've just been in a state of recovery. It's been just about a month since I took my last pill, brother, and I am still just struggling to get by, and walking the dogs outside is hard, and it hurts and stuff, and it could be weeks, months, even years before I get everything back. And that's just assuming I will get everything back. So it's been a rough go. And when you're a single dad and your kid says to you, "We used to go play in the pool," oh my gosh, that just just a killer. So yeah, we the screen free is the summer. That had to take a back seat this year, because unfortunately, when you can't get up and walk around and do all the fun activities, the screen is like, "Sit down on the couch. I'll give you a good time. Relax. Put your feet up." And that's what I had to do, brother. How you doing?
Yeah, well, I was, while you were recovering from that, our household got COVID, so we were down for COVID. And then right after that, our youngest got pink eye, our middle got strep and an ear infection, and our oldest got pneumonia. So it's been a crazy two and a half weeks here as everybody's recovering from COVID. And I feel the same way. This is my third round of COVID, brother. And every time I get it, I feel like I am hit by a bus. It just like wipes me. Like I feel like I went through hell week at football training or something. So I also feel that journey of it being hard to get off the couch. So, but we're back, listeners. We're making it. We're pushing through. So welcome back to another episode. What are we talking about today, JJ?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, buddy, is I wanted to first mention, there's a very loose tie-in to from my situation to what we're going to talk about today, but I just want to remind everybody, because I am in a state of suffering right now, and it's really hard. And you've talked about this a number of times too. When you visited doctors and you don't really get the answers you need, like you go back to the doctor and stuff, and they almost look at you like you're crazy in some ways, and you feel like you're just not being heard for the things you're actually truly feeling. And that's been kind of one of the things for me is through this process of finding out that I'm one of the apparently maybe less than 1% of people reporting these very serious side effects. I was a little bit nervous when I got the medication, that I even asked the question, like, I'm not sure about this, but I didn't really ask enough questions. I think I needed to advocate for myself better. And, I think that's the thing, is it's okay to ask questions. The medical staff is supposed to be there for that. And, I think that translates into, psychiatric and psychological treatment for our kiddos with neurodiversity. If one doctor says, "Okay, we want to put you on this pill's going to do this, or this pill is for usually treats depression, but we think it would also benefit you in this way," well, ask questions. Like, what does the family history look like? How could that possibly affect my kid? So that's kind of a loose tie-in to what I want to say, or what we're going to talk about today is, speak up for yourself. There's something that was recently termed, or maybe it just came to the surface more recently in like a TikTok video, The term is dishonest harmony. And dishonest harmony is a fascinating concept, and is usually, we'll say, it's blamed on the boomer generation, our parents. The idea that we need to put on a certain face when we go out. But then that face, when we try and come into the household, we have a hard time actually confronting some of the conflict that we have going on. So instead of working through traumas and talking about traumas, we stuff it, and we suggest that that's going to lead to the most harmonious type of outcome for our household, our family, and society at large. But then what we end up finding out is that we are, essentially eroding, intimacy and trust, and it actually like prevents growth. So instead of seeing breakthroughs, we're denying the opportunity to create breakthroughs. So yeah, I think dishonest harmony is something that I really appreciate, being put out there in some video, and then it got picked up and now it's being reported on. That I think it's a good topic for us to discuss.
Yeah, I think a lot of families, it's easy to fall into this, you know. One secret becomes two, one lie becomes three, you know. And what we define as lies sometimes, you know, we think of it as black and white, but it can be a lot of gray area of just like what we need, what we want in the moment, or yeah, how we feel slighted, you know. And a lot of those times, those little lies, they build up and then they evolve into this resentment that I think a lot of family dynamics have, because they get so pigeonholed into not expressing themselves in an honest way. And you know, I don't want to blame it on the boomer generation, but you know, I think that it does come from that
It's
generation.
okay
And
to.
yeah, you know, I've had some talks with my dad about this kind of stuff, you know, and you know, opening up and talking, and my dad will say like, "Boy, like we never talked about this when I was a kid." You know, like you have it easy. You know, we didn't. My father wouldn't even talk to me about this stuff. You know, like, and it's almost like this contention of pride. You know, of like, be a man, suck it up, do what you need to, stuff it down, and harden your exterior, you know. And when I was going through my sobriety in AA, there was a lot of layers to peel back on that onion, brother, you know. And the deeper you got into those layers, you know, the more existential and philosophical and you know, and these past behaviors became into the limelight of talking about it. And my dad was just so you know, very in the opinion of, I don't understand how you can go talk about this stuff with a room full of other men, strangers that you don't know, and you're going to open up about your deepest, darkest secrets, you know. And it was just something that I couldn't get him to resonate with. I couldn't get him to understand, you know, as being a part of this generation where I feel mental health has really changed over the last 20 years, even since when I was a kid and we were talking about therapy and mental health, to now in my 30s, almost 40s, buddy, pushing 40 here, you know, and the way
Let me
that we
know when you
talked
get
about it.
here.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, so it's the conversation has really evolved over the last few decades here, and unfortunately my dad and that generation and my parents haven't really seemed to be able to keep up with the ever changing perspective on this topic. So I do think that it has a large part to do with that boomer generation, that depression era, the Vietnam, World War, Cold War. You know, everyone was just on edge. It was so real of a threat, you know, to everyone's safety and
Mhm.
livelihood, that you just didn't talk about it. It was like that was the one coping mechanism you had, was to just like, don't talk about the danger that surrounds us all the time. Just keep on pushing.
Well, I'd appreciate the idea of too, of not just simply blaming it on the boomer generation, because just like us, we had somebody we need, we were looking up to, and those were our parents, usually those figures in our lives. And of course, those people were kids one time too, and they had to be raised by somebody as well. And now what's interesting is we have the whole world is basically capable of raising us in some form, whether it's tapping onto your screen and learning about somebody across the entire, the entire globe and their own personal experience, or otherwise. So our life can be on stage at any moment, and what does that do? That tends to lead to disruption in our experience, and what one person from, you know uh 200 miles, 3,000 miles away does in response to our experience can affect us. So now we have the ability to really tap into the psyche of every person in existence who essentially decides to put themselves out there. And that is hard to, essentially keep both your personal life and your public life, apart and separate, because we do put ourselves on display. And I'm not saying that's the reason why, but it is interesting to see the evolution of people over time. We do have so much more information at our fingertips that it does become something that we have to process in a much more public way than I think our parents might have had to in their childhood. So, they go to church on Sundays. They see everybody and they're wearing their Sunday best. Everybody looks perfect. Well, now we've got online to kind of curate what we're going to decide to show, but then people want to give their own little comments in there, and they feel totally safe behind their keyboards to make a comment on somebody else that they probably don't know the full story. And so therefore we have pretty much a wild west, which creates creates disharmony, if you want to call it, within our own self-esteem. So I think that plays a part in it. But honestly, yeah, it's funny to me, not funny, but interesting to me to see how the generations tend to kind of isolate themselves in the idea of, oh, we used to do this way. You guys have it easy. But the truth is like, we're seeing, like you said, that evolution of time present itself in a new way of working through our good times and our bad times. And that, to me, is something to embrace and learn and grow from, rather than reject, because I think the rejection is ultimately the validation of the idea of dishonest harmony.
Man, a lot of things are coming up in my main here. Sorry if you can hear my garage opening and closing right now as the wife is reorganizing down there. A lot of things come to my mind though when you talk about this. First and foremost, being like, I think there's two parts of this emotional disharmony or dishonest disharmony, and like one being like the external, right? Like how we present our quote unquote truth to our family, our friends, coworkers, peers, support systems, and how we also present that truth to ourselves internally and between our ears. And I think that there can be a dishonest disharmony in ourselves, in between our ears, in the sense of like, we're not honest with ourselves of what we need, of what would fulfill us, or who or what our core values are. And something that's coming up for me is when I was going through my sobriety in AA, a lot of that was purging all of this. What did you do wrong? Who did you wrong? What did they do to you wrong? How did you feel about it? What would you like to do to them about it? What would forgiveness look like? You literally write down in every single thing you can remember that you've ever done in your life bad towards somebody, every lie you've ever told. And that was like, to see it all there on paper, JJ, is one thing, then to just go and say, in those embarrassing third grade moments in the shower where you go, oh gosh, that memory pops up in the shower and you go, why did I think of that? God, I was so stupid. Why did I do that in third grade? To Miss Stewart, and then when you're looking at a whole journal full of it and you can read it and you really bring yourself there with every detail of it, and how it affected your life moving forward from that moment, and how you've thought about it and how it's played a part in who you are. Those are some powerful thoughts, and they're really uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable at first. You don't want to do it. Oh, it's boring. I don't have the time for this. I don't want to do it. I don't need to do it. We create all these excuses and obstacles for ourselves when it comes to like uncovering our honesty about ourselves and who we are, and the lie that we tell ourselves in between the ears, just to get through the day or the moment. And when I saw it all in a journal and was reading it and sharing it with a sponsor and in groups and with therapists and talking about it, it was really a powerful moment of like, man, I've really been dishonest with myself. I have been lying to not only everybody in my life, but myself, of who I am, of who I want to be. I had this idea of this is who I said I want to be, and this is how it is. But I never put any thought to like, what are the actions to make that person a reality versus just a want in your head, a fictionalized character that's not real yet. Because for 30 years of my life, I said, I want to be this person, but I wasn't doing anything to be that person, to become that person. I thought that was noble, that I wanted to be this good person, but I wasn't acting in that way. And when I saw all the truth there in a journal, and I was spending 9 months going through all of my life, it was like this epiphany aha moment for me where I said, I never want to lie again. Like truth has to be a core value of mine, because through the accountability and the willingness to look at my own reflection is the only way that I can change who I say I want to be, and who I can figure out what the things I need to do to become that person. Because before, it was so uncomfortable to think about, you just never thought about it. You just pushed it off, and then that resentment comes for yourself. You start resenting yourself, and then you start telling yourself this narrative: I am bad, I can't do it, I am a failure, I'll never be able to, and that was really a powerful tool for me to evolve. And I don't know, maybe like you said, our parents had it in different ways, that theirs wasn't in AA or therapy. It was at church on your Sunday best, or maybe closed doors with a pastor, in confessional or something like that. Or with your buddy on a fishing trip getting drunk, and Budweiser's out on the river. It just maybe looked different, and the conversations have evolved, and we're asking different questions now that, I think the longer you go without asking those questions, the harder it is to ask those questions and to be really truthful about what the answers are to those questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask this question because I mean AA is amazing, and it does it does bring us out of our darkest place to hopefully our better self. I guess my question to you is, do you believe or do you see it as a possible real true breakthrough for somebody if they, instead of saying, okay, I know I've made mistakes, I'm just going to move on forward and find my core values from here on, and and kind of ignore some of the past, or at least not truly like walk through past experience. Do you think that would be not as transformational than for somebody to go through like those, like let's say like the 12 steps, and really uncover some of those things within, in order to then propel forward by finding your truest best self, knowing what the past looked like?
I think to each their own, JJ. Just because I'm spouting this off as truth doesn't mean it's truth for everybody. It was just my truth. And I think maybe my dad spoke his truth throughout his journey. And that's the best that he could come up with. That's his solution, is shoving it down. And he's tried everything else, and he's realized, what? This is what works for me. We don't talk about it. This is how I get through. This is how I'm the best man that I could be. And our generation growing up with all these other different resources and all these different things, we go, you're not trying hard enough, try harder, do something more, but who am I to say? Who am I to say? Just like who is anybody to say? Just like who are the doctors to say? Just like what you were talking about. I think that we really have to take these outside external opinions with a grain of salt, and really have to be able to be honest with with ourselves on what works and what doesn't, and we have to be aware of what is detrimental and what is used towards growth. And I think that that's one part of it, is that honesty and recognition and accountability. And I think another part of it is having a partner like you know, an accountability partner, someone that you can feel honest with, that you feel safe opening up to about, you know, so when you do fuck up, you know, you have someone that can go and knows who you are and some of the and how the conversations go to get you through what you need to do to fix it, what you need to do to recover, what you need to do to stand back up. And you know, I think with that mentality of put on your Sunday best and smile and pretend like it's okay, like when something does happen and you fuck up or you make a mistake, you have no one to turn to because you're embarrassed. Everyone sees this perfect person and you don't want to break this facade of this statuesque, you know, perfection that you've chiseled away for everybody, you know. But I like having a friend like you where I can say, damn it, it's Tuesday, I fucked up again, JJ, you know. And you know, like you know what that looks like, and we have a safety in conversing about it and talking about what to do next. So I think that it helps me, but you know, maybe not for everybody. Maybe it does help people to lone wolf it, you know, or to shove it down. Maybe there's something so traumatic that we can't resonate with, that we can't, you know, that somebody's going through that we're telling them to deal with, but that telling them to deal with it could just be like the shattering of their world, of their reality, you know. And I'm not dismissing that there are some traumas out there that, you know, maybe too hard to look at for a lot of people, but I would like to challenge people to at least try and see what that honesty looks like, you know, because I do think that there is a potential for I don't want to say better growth, you know, but at least in my experience, yes, better growth.
Well, and I'm just thinking about the whole, the life journey and all that too is, if we do have that experience of dishonest harmony as a child, what's that going to do as we grow older? Because we are social creatures and we do everybody everybody has a desire to, have some form of community or relationship. And if we learn as a child to not talk about our feelings, or are told that we're what we feel, we need to deal with it on our own, and then present ourselves as somebody stable when we return to people. Well, gosh, everybody has challenges and everybody has the desire to relate to others. So how can you truly fully relate to people if you suggest that you're perfect, and your parents tell you to not talk about this stuff, don't feel this, like, don't you don't freak out, don't have a meltdown, everything's going to be okay, just denying all of your true emotional experience. And then you have to go out eventually and start to, you know, date, have friendships and stuff. I could tell you that I struggled with validation when I was young, in terms of receiving it and just being seen as who I am. And I remember my marriage, if I had a disagreement, I didn't know how to handle that, because I didn't get to do that. I didn't get to have healthy conflict. It wasn't allowed. It was just everything was suggested to me as bad conflict, which is silly because we love each other. We should be able to work through things, right? So then some of the things that I would do would be like stonewalling, anxious attachment, and just overall, not getting to talk in a healthy manner with my wife at the time through our conflict. So that started on the individual level for me, even though it was also on a relationship level as a child, because then I had to carry myself into the next world of being an adult. Well, I wasn't allowed to be a person with emotion for the most part, especially if it was difficult emotion, right? We know what that means: anger, meltdowns, and stuff like that. I wasn't allowed that when I was young. And so, therefore, when I started feeling that in my relationships, I didn't know how to work with somebody else on those, because this is what I grew up with. So you're right when you talk about the individual journey and what you said everybody's different. I mentioned that earlier too. we go by averages in the medical community a lot of times to then apply to the individual, which is sometimes scary because the individual can have a specific predisposition and we find out after the fact because we didn't do enough maybe research, who knows. So the individual does play a part. Let's say we do. I'm going to try and break it down a little bit. What does dishonest harmony do to the individual? Well, I would imagine it definitely stifles your growth. Avoiding conflict prevents individuals from learning to address challenges, resolve probably disagreements, like I was saying, and develop like their own coping mechanisms. I imagine trust with the self is probably taken a hit too. Dishonesty creates a foundation of mistrust, right? So if you're going to try and hinder any sort of authentic connection with somebody, you're creating essentially in that moment a certain level of distrust. How do you work your way through that if you're not meant to talk about it? Obviously, you mentioned building resentment. Resentment's a big issue if you suppress your feelings, because then you're just holding them in, and we talk about that, like you said with AA, uncovering the truth of your story. It can be painful, but then it does create hopefully that path to transformation. But if we do have resentment because we haven't worked on it, we haven't had that healthy conflict, then we could, manifest passive aggressive behaviors or have emotional outbursts because we don't know how to talk through it. We just know how to be the loudest person in the room, which, of course, we had a previous episode where we talked about being the loudest in the room and how that doesn't generally create a foundation of trust and connection. So, in addition to that too, with your own individual self, I imagine lying about the conflict, you're probably creating a problem with the idea of problem solving. So that creates, if you have an underlying issue and you ignore it, that's basically telling yourself like, don't find solutions, don't address the root of the conflict. So you're not really helping yourself, you're actually harming yourself, especially on the individual level, because you're keeping that within. So that's kind of my thoughts on the individual self. But then, of course, if we bring that individual to a relationship, that's going to create a distance through dishonesty, and it's going to probably eat away at your intimacy. The emotional distance is almost a guarantee, right? Because you know that you can't make that connection, you can't work on certain things with that person. So therefore, I'm just gonna keep that to myself. Which, oh my goodness, I don't know how many times I've heard people talk about their parents didn't want to tell them about a health issue because they didn't want to the parent didn't want them to be worried. Well, that's not helpful. We know eventually our health is going to have a certain form of decline, or we're going to take a hit in some form, and if we can't tell the ones that we're supposed to trust the most about that issue, well, that's probably going to create some emotional distance as well. So then, in addition to that, with relationships, you're going to have a lot more misunderstandings. I'd imagine if you have unresolved issues, they fester and they lead to probably some misinterpretations and assumptions, and that's going to damage the relationship because you're not talking about things. And then, two, we could talk about a community or just, between two people. Like if you don't go to somebody with some of this healthy conflict, you're limiting that opportunity for support. So your partner's not going to be able to be there in the way that a partner is designed as a human being to be there for you. So, back to the idea that the parents and, suggesting like, I can't talk about that health issue because I don't want them to worry. Well, you're actually denying the opportunity for that great connection through support. We all benefit. And I think that's part of this evolution of people today, is that we actually find that giving support and receiving support is a big part of relationship building, and that grows stronger communities. I mean, you and I, we meet online most of the time, but man, it has grown. This support that we have for each other, that has grown into one of the best friendships I've ever experienced, to the point where I'm like, God, how can we get out there and get more of this family, because we don't see them on a day-to-day basis? That's through that support, that's through that trust building, that's through, saying, you got a difficult conflict going on in your life, talk with me about it, I'm there to support you, brother. This is how we succeed as, in our relationships. This is how we succeed as a community. And it just helps us grow and feel like real, true, fully rounded human beings, rather than somebody who says, well, I can't say this, I can't talk about this because that will in some way hinder what we've got going on. No, it actually is going to create that true, beautiful, full rounded bond that you are always craving, especially when you were a child and you wanted some validation, not because you just were selfish and you wanted to make a big fuss and then you wanted somebody to throw a sucker in your mouth or throw a toy at you. No, it's because you have an emotion and you're not sure what to do. And that support is just right there, or that support is denying you.
Yeah, I've said to myself before, but I don't know if it's true, that, if I had found therapy earlier in my life, it probably could have saved my first marriage. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe could be. Odds are probably good I could have, but I was so unwilling to admit the benefits of therapy. Again, growing up with boomer parents, it was like, therapy, nothing's wrong with you. You're not broken. You don't need to do that, you know? Um, and when I did open that door to therapy, it was like all of those things that I had been like avoiding in my relationship, I was now talking about. And it was like all things that I knew were like detrimental to like a healthy relationship and a healthy marriage. But I would always just kind of like, talk myself out of it. And I think a lot of my fear and apprehension in going into therapy lied in that fear of having those conversations, you know, that I would have those conversations in my head and say, well, this isn't healthy the way that that's going, but what are you going to do? You don't know the answer. Oh, well, or well, what's happened the last time you had that conversation? Didn't go well, right? So like, let's not have it, and therapy was really like this aha moment of like figuring out what those next questions were, right? And like figuring out how to continue the conversation rather than just stop it in my mind when it got uncomfortable. There was someone there to ask some questions that were like, well, that was a really good question, but I got too scared of this conversation and where it might go to, think about how that was a good question rather than a bad one. And yeah, a lot of those behaviors that I talked away, that I saw surface in my first marriage, once I opened myself up to therapy and was talking about it, was like, how could you not see that? How you knew that was wrong to react that way, to say that thing, but you just didn't have the skills to change it. You just had the skills to recognize that's bad, but you didn't have the skills to change it to what was good, or what good even looked like. And I think what you're saying is absolutely right. Like there's a lot of, and I've said it in past episodes here too, that like the real growth, I think, comes with sharing your experience with someone else and getting that validation and that pushback and that feedback and opinion on your experience, and taking in somebody else's experience and creating a new experience together with both of those perspectives is like, that's the gold, right? That's the growth. That's the new. That's the, and I think we get so like comfortable with, well, this is how the relationship is, whether it be good or bad. And sometimes it can be bad, but we're so comfortable with the bad that we don't want to rock the boat, sink it. We know where the holes are and how to plug them up. So we don't want to rock the boat and add a new hole. But I think that there's really great chance for us to learn more about not only one another but ourselves through these conversations, if we're just willing to have it and take that step into the unknown of fear and uncertainty, and put down the walls of self-defense to hear someone else's opinion about what our behavior is for them and their experience and their story.
Mm, yeah, and I love the idea of talking about therapy, and I would like to also bring about, what does that look like for somebody who maybe therapy isn't their option at this time. What does it look like to kind of try and break that cycle and find that growth? And like you said, you could, maybe there was a possibility to save that first marriage. Probably part of that was, just still trying to learn about yourself and learn about how you communicate, how you talk about how you're feeling. And what's great about therapy is you're going to somebody who isn't in your situation, isn't seeing the meltdowns, isn't seeing the breakdown of communication and stuff. They're seeing you talk about you. So we just naturally use I statements in therapy because that's what we have to do. We're not going to talk about the other person and be accusatory toward that other person without bringing in the I statements, at least in therapy. That other person isn't there to defend themselves. And that's usually when that language, that style of language, really starts to help us work through some of those conflicts that we're struggling with, that we feel like we don't have a voice for. Sometimes that voice just comes out. That's why a therapist works so well. Sometimes it just comes out because you do have the opportunity to talk and speak for yourself, and you're not speaking against somebody, you're speaking for yourself. So therefore the I statements are a natural part of therapy. Some people, they end up finding themselves in therapy for, what is it? I think they're always like, the therapist is always like, okay, well, we've got about 5 minutes left. And that's like the most words that the therapist says throughout the session is like, all right, we got about 5 minutes left. Well, is there anything else you would like to talk about quick? So for the majority of a therapy session, you're talking and you get to get your voice out there. And it feels refreshing just to get it out there, to let somebody know this is what I'm feeling. I get to speak. This is a form of validation because I'm allowed to speak what I feel. That's a huge part that I think a lot of people could find if you don't have the option to get a therapist. One of the things that I think we promote a lot of times is journaling, or get a recorder out, record your voice, just do something where you get your thoughts out, because when you do that, that starts to push away against the idea of that dishonest harmony that you experienced for so many years. You don't have to hide that. You don't have to suppress it. You can get it out. It can be by yourself, but put it out there. Make it actually like a practice, not something where you're thinking it, but something where you're actually putting it out there. That form of therapy, we'll call it that, um, without somebody present with you, is still a form of therapy for oneself, because you're identifying, you're putting into practice those communication methods where you're not actually having to fight somebody, rather you are working with that conflict. And then, I'm probably jumping a few steps here, but the more you practice that, perhaps you find a safe person that you can talk to about those things. You work through that with them, person who has actually truly a friend who wants to support you. You feel heard, you feel validated, and you put more into practice what you've been doing on your own time to eventually work that into the conflict that exists directly between you and somebody else. And you realize, if I continue going through this process of practicing I statements and practicing talking about what I'm feeling inside, I am no longer telling somebody, you have all the power because I'm angry at you for this. You're not being accusatory, but instead you're offering up a little bit of a glimpse of how you are responding to certain situations, because it's either harmful or hurtful or maybe even helpful. And that's how the healthy conflict can start to form, and you're pushing against the idea of that dishonest harmony in the process.
And you mentioned last time you went on a rant here. Um, I think that um, there's disharmony between a parent and child relationship too, right? And I think that we can easily create those dynamics moving into adulthood, and that's something that I really am trying to be intentional about not creating. As I definitely want a relationship with my kids that suggests that they can come to me with whatever, you know, even if it's, hey, last night I OD'd in a hotel room with some strippers. I want to be the first call, JJ. I don't want them to feel like they got to call their roommate to help them cover it up. I want them to call me and we can talk about that, and I want to be that first call. And I think creating that environment takes a lot of like me sitting on the back seat of my first reaction to a lot of the stuff that comes out, and I know what I'm about to say probably will be a little controversial to a lot of different parenting styles, but the way that I typically am intentional about parenting is I will be honest about anything, and that'll get me in trouble with my wife. Sometimes maybe I'll be honest about too mature of topics for their age range. But I'm somebody that, like, if I'm asked about it, I definitely don't want to be like, I definitely don't want to offer the answer, well, when you're older you'll know, or one of those, or you're too young for that, like, I don't want to make them feel less than, or that I have an opinion that they are incapable or unable to handle this information. You know, I think, yeah, it can maybe get you into some trouble. You talk about, again, a little too mature stuff, and then you say, don't go talk about it at school. They go talk about it at school. You're getting a call from the office. I've been there before too, brother. All right. Listen, you gotta take the consequences sometimes. All right. But I think that in having those conversations on why it's appropriate to talk about at home and not school, and not with your teacher and not with your friends, but in this kind of scenario, and how we can talk about it and create an environment to ask those questions and be curious rather than judgmental and be quiet about it until you're older. And then by the time they're older, they don't trust you because you wouldn't tell them the stuff when they were younger. So I really feel that, as hard as it is to navigate sometimes, I really try to be as upfront and honest about whatever the kids are bringing to me in that topic. And I see a lot of parents, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not judging anybody here. You want to be a bulldozer parent. You want a helicopter. You want to go out and be a scout parent out in front of them and to clear the brush for their path. Like, that's again, to each their own. I'm just saying, in my personal experience, I feel that there is a real gold of conversation and communication and connection when I can be honest. As hard as it is to navigate, and as much as it does get me into trouble sometimes, with other adults or social situations, I definitely want to be very intentional about creating that for when we get older, and the black and white of right and wrong becomes more gray.
Well, yeah, buddy, and I think that's awesome. And one of the ways that I think you find the best path to that is kind of like what we've been talking about, is practice through community, through people of trusted source, a trusted source. And like you and I, we get on a call with other men, to talk about fatherhood, regularly. And I find that in order to best show up for my son, I have time with the guys. I have time with men who actually have the desire to grow and to be better dads. I can tell them about something I'm struggling with, and they can give me thoughts and ideas. And that's just a natural calming mechanism, coping mechanism for me, is because I'm thinking back, just in our conversation right now, I'm thinking back to this weekend with kiddo, where he was being kind of not so kind with his words, and I stopped him. I didn't hit him or anything. I stopped him, I tapped him on the shoulder. He goes, "Hey, don't do that." But I was already in my emotional state that I was upset at his being, kind of, rude and mean. And so I said, "Oh, no, no, thank you. I'm not going to go there." And I was not in my best state. Had I had a conversation with my community members, I wouldn't have gone back to my early years where I was denied my ability to have have an emotional response to things. And I would have looked at Cohen a little bit different in that moment and said, "All right, he's probably escalated in some form here." That's my curiosity come into play, which is something that we promote time and again as good fathers, rather than being judgmental based on our emotional state. The time that I have in community generally helps me be a better human. And we have decided to seek out other people who have a desire for growth. So when you combine those two things, then you have the ability to see beyond yourself and to want to be curious about the people you are closest to. So, interesting thing when I think about the community that we went out and saw when we were younger, in my own situation, where you know literally had to wear the clothes we only wore on Sunday to church to present a certain type of person that didn't look like the rest of the week. Not saying I was dirty and nasty all week and had all these issues that I would be displaying everywhere else, but the truth is like, yeah, we were putting on the show, and we never just like as families just got got together and said, yeah, we deal with this, we struggle with this and stuff, and find the relief and the validation in that because somebody else's experience actually matched ours, and then we could bring that to our family and to be of great service to them, to tell them, this is what I learned, this is the benefit of talking about these things. We didn't get there, and as kids, we probably don't have all those tools. So then, like you said, as dad, you're giving them the door, saying it is already open, and I am not going to shut it on you because you've made a poor decision. I, instead of wanting to let you know, I'm right here on the other side of it, and I'm going to give you a hug and we're going to talk about it. It's not always going to be easy, but I want you to trust me because I know that I'm fallible too. I make mistakes. Here's what I learned. And boy, let me tell you, there's some ones that I got in there that you haven't even gotten close to yet. So, I'm going to be honest about my experience, and that's going to build that trust. That's going to build that understanding. That's going to build that connection where they're going to want to say, I got to call dad because I messed up.
Yeah, and I I've said it before, if apologizing was a superpower, I would be Superman. I think I've gotten really good at it. Being perfect, no, I'll never be. I'm gonna make mistakes. I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna need to apologize. But it is one of the most gratifying things to hear when I do apologize to the kids and they say, "It's okay, Coley." I never got the chance to say that to my parents. And I never heard the I'm sorry's or the accountability, and I say it a lot. And I wish that I said it less because I wish I was better at not making the mistakes. But I do believe, in my experience again, that the most growth and the most connection that I have is one where I can be accountable and take responsibility for my lapses and failures and hiccups. And those are the ones where I really feel like, man, those kids heard me. They listened, they heard, they respected, and they took something from it. So I think that there is a real power in, like I said, being vulnerable and being transparent and trying to live in the most honest way possible. And that takes it's hard, because I feel like we as humans all want to hide bits of ourselves from the world, you know, whether it be a bad habit, bad mindset. Um, I think that there's parts of ourselves that we're too scared to share with the world. And I would really like us to challenge ourselves on that. Because again, in my experience, it's where I've experienced the most growth is when I have had the courage to do that. So, thanks for the conversation, man. I want to end on one story. We were talking about two mature themes and stuff. And I don't know why this story came into my head, but, Naomi used the word sexy for the first time the other night. She used it wrong, so don't worry. But I was going through some baby pictures, and there was a little picture of baby Coley naked on the fur rug. We've all got a naked baby picture on a fur rug, JJ. Don't tell me you don't have a bearskin rug with a naked baby JJ on it.
No,
we come from the 80s, the 70s and 80s. There's a bearskin rug in there somewhere, man.
No, my favorite one is still of when we were in a bubble bath, and my parent, I'm pretty sure it was my dad, was taking a picture of me. I was pretending like I was sinking, so I had my hands like praying, like, "Oh, save me" and stuff. Little did I know was my naked butt was sticking right up above the bubbles the whole time.
Well, Naomi finds this picture of me and she goes, whose baby is this? This is a naked baby. This is a sexy picture. This baby is naked. We can't have this out. So I thought that was funny and cute that she used the word sexy to describe a baby picture. Anyways, that's my story to end on. Thanks for the conversation, brother. It's good stuff.
Yeah, buddy, I always appreciate it. And good reminder about perfectionism, like you were talking about, is like I don't think this is the correct metaphor, but I'm gonna say anyways. Like, we can try and chase the sun all we want, but we're never gonna catch it. And if we constantly try and pursue that, then we're missing the opportunities for those sunrises and sunsets and the beautiful things that come from sitting in the moment and saying, yeah, I can't quite do everything, and I can't do everything perfectly. But then the beautiful thing is things come around, and our kids find out that they too can in fact learn from us about the beauty of life if we allow ourselves to make mistakes. That's one of the things that we're working with our son on right now, is that he's been very hard on himself. And even in that moment yesterday, he said, I'm just so stupid. And he was saying some really like damaging words about himself that just didn't reflect my view of him at all. I saw somebody who tries really hard, and he actually used the word misunderstood, buddy. He actually said he feels misunderstood, which is pretty amazing, because he's identifying the thoughts and emotions that somebody else could possibly have, and then saying, you know what, there's a lot about me that people just have chosen not to be curious about.
Mm,
And so he's wanting, I can already see that in him. He's wanting to break the idea of dishonest harmony, because that's not going to help. That's not going to make him feel better about himself, because he knows that these
mm,
things haven't been worked on. They haven't been repaired. Instead, they're things that are just continuing to sit out there, and the self-esteem continues to suffer. He's saying, I feel much misunderstood. That's the step in the process of then saying, all right, what can I do for myself in this situation, and who can I talk to? He said,
mm.
I'm misunderstood. He's already putting it out there, and that's very brave of an 8-year-old. So that's my story that I'm
Most definitely.
excited to continue to go through the journey. I hate to see him hurting and suffering sometimes, because people do misunderstand him, and he sometimes, in his hyper focus, that means he doesn't see the world around him, and people are like, oh, this kid is so difficult. No, you're misunderstanding here, folks. It does take you patience, and then we can find the best path forward. What do we got to do? We got to talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. Well said, Bud. And I'm curious to hear how that story is going to progress. We experience a lot of that in our household too. Something that we're working on. So maybe that's the next episode. Is self-talk, how to teach our kids healthy self-talk. But
Sounds like a
thanks
good
for
one.
listening, guys. Thank you, JJ, for your insight. This has been another episode of the ADH Dads. I'm your host, CJ.
And I'm JJ.
Cue the Mr. Rogers music. See you next time.